I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On tonight's episode, we'll discuss Billy Napier's most recent press conference, a slew of transfer commits into the program, including two more Raging Cajuns, Jay Bateman and Sean Spencer, hired onto the coaching staff, and we'll wrap up with our final thoughts on that coaching staff there, Will, since Billy Napier, I mean, it seems like we've been going with these hires, but we're finally coming to a point where we're looking like the team we're going to see in 2022.
Yeah, well, somebody asked him during the press conference this week whether he knew who everybody that he hired or how many people he'd hired. And he's like, no, I'm only worried about the people I'm bringing in next. So, I'm pretty sure Napier has like a folder where it lists all the people who were brought in, all the different positions and what they're responsible for, just sort of ticking those boxes as he goes. But Napier said he was going to build an army. Certainly the social media presence of the people in the offices is much more prominent than it was under the Mullen administration. And then you start talking to some of the recruits or start listening to what some of the recruits are saying. And, just the consistency in terms of the communication is significantly better. So whether that's going to translate or not completely, I don't know. I mean, that there's obviously you've got A&M, Georgia and Alabama up there at the top, and that's where Napier's going to have to crack, but certainly early returns are pretty good, but we'll see. We'll know after fall practice, because that'll be when everybody will know what that 2023 class looks like and whether putting this staff together has done what it needs to do from a recruiting perspective.
A lot of returns early, very positive returns early here. And it's like you said, we're going against some behemoths in recruiting, but that's where we want to be. We belong in the conversation with those behemoths, and we haven't been there the last few years. So we'll start it on two bits here. And hey, as much as we've seen, they keep rolling out the announcements. The Gators are in the news every single day on Twitter about hiring this person or that person. Billy Napier, it's only been a few times that he's actually gotten up and spoken in front of Gator Nation here. Another presser this week. Again, just the same type of demeanor every time. That's one thing you notice about him over and over again. Just calm, cool, and collected. This does not seem like a guy who's going to be a super moody dude. You're going to get about the same from him, whether you win or lose, it feels like. And, he gets up there. He's talking about this week, Tuesday here, which we're recording this on Tuesday night. Tuesday was the start of phase one of the program, what he calls the foundation phase, where they try to define for the players what they're going to build, what they're going to build on this year. And each year he made the point that you start the process over. There's new players, there's new staff. Of course, you have a level of attrition now in college football that you didn't even have a few years ago with the transfer portal too. So a lot of new people in the building. There'll be new leadership roles at all levels. You'll have freshmen coming in. You'll have new staff members. And this is just a phase, it sounds like, Will, to get everybody on the same page and lay that foundation for the season. It also physically, it consists of 10 lifts and 12 team runs. And he says they're just trying to build trust in the organization and establish communication so that they really develop their relationships with those players during this phase.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple things here. One is every organization has some form of this. And, Mullen may not have called it the foundation, but they had something similar. And in fact, if you go and read even the postscripts of Mullen's tenure at Florida, he got buy-in pretty quick, and he was able to really sort of bring some discipline to the team that was missing under McElwain this first couple of years. It wasn't until the last couple of years the wheels really seemed to fall off. So I don't know that Napier's doing anything that's all that different from another coach who would come in, but what he's doing is he's trying to figure out who's going to play ball and who's not, right? I mean, who's interested in buying into the program and who's not. And then there's a door right over there, and he's going to point people who don't want to play ball towards that door, because at the end of the day, there's actually some benefit to having guys transfer out and find opportunities elsewhere in terms of some of the way the NCAA is gifting counters for the first 7 guys who transfer out. So I think there's obviously you want to set a foundation, you want to build relationships, you want to get buy-in, all that sort of stuff. But this sort of reminds me of that first day of practice in high school where they just beat you to hell and then kind of decide, to see who really wants to be there. And then it's all sort of downhill from there once they get the people to stomp off who don't really want to be there.
Well, and of course, we've already seen it seems like he's had plenty of conversations letting guys know who he really wants in the building and who he's okay moving on from. I mean, we even saw this week Gamble commits to UCF on a transfer, whereas one guy that's still in the building, I know we talked about this on the last episode, but Emory Jones still in the building. Another piece of news he addressed in the press conference. He is enrolled in classes. It looks like he's going to stay on the team. Will, I have a sneaky suspicion that he sat down with Emory Jones and basically told him he'd give him a shot to compete in spring ball. And I think Emory Jones will take it from there and see where it goes. So it wouldn't surprise me at all to see Emory Jones transfer sometime in the spring or, after spring practice or over the summer. But there is a chance that Emory could still be on this team at some point. He hasn't entered the portal yet.
Sure, win the job, right? I mean, at the end of the day, so I think a lot of us suspect that Anthony Richardson didn't win the job because of sort of the seniority and the favoritism that seemed to exist with the previous staff, but we don't know that that's true. We saw what happened on game day, but we didn't see what happened on practice all during the week. And, as much as I like Anthony Richardson, I wouldn't say that he was incredibly consistent when he was out there on the field. He was incredibly explosive, but he wasn't incredibly consistent. And so, and he certainly couldn't stay on the field either, right? I mean, I think Anthony Richardson.
Stop with the backflips, Anthony. Stop, man. We know you're a freak athlete, dude. Stop, though, please.
Oh, come on, man. The backflips are fun, and they're they're fine. It's the dance moves that
you got hurt dancing. You're entering old man status if you're getting hurt dancing. So no more backflips, please. It happens I pulled my first hamstring in college. It's you're just aging a little bit.
Come on,
backflips, man.
He's not even 22 yet. I fell on some ice today, and I'm perfectly fine. I'm 40 years old, so
perfectly fine. I would have liked to see you the first 30 seconds and asked you if you were perfect. Are you perfectly fine?
I mean, I'm fine. My butt hurts a little bit. I'm not in my chair. I'm gonna have to move around a little bit tonight, but other than that, I'm fine.
Yeah, Will Miles playing through injury. You gotta love it. Hey, another piece of information in the presser here. I did a classy move to congratulate Georgia on their national title. Said he knows a lot of people in the building, happy for him, but instead of focusing on what's going on up there, we have our own lawn to mow. He just throws these sayings out there. I know he threw another one out there. Vision without action is a dream, too. So Napier just drops these little nuggets in throughout the whole presser. I did enjoy that, but I thought that was good. A good take on the Georgia title because, hey, it's like if we focus on what we can do in this building, we know we're capable of lifting that trophy too.
This all sounds great. I mean, the reality is that no one's going to like the way Napier does these press conferences if Florida's losing and getting its butt handed to him on the recruiting trail, which is the same thing. When Mullen came in, everybody's like, oh, he's so high energy. That's such a great contrast from Jim McElwain, who's sitting there with his loafers up on the counter when he's doing his press conference. So, I mean, look, I think there are things you can do in the press conferences that harm you actively. And Mullen certainly showed that over the last year or two, that there are things you can say that you shouldn't, and that having somebody in PR who can control you makes good sense. Napier being sort of a quiet, thoughtful person, I think will serve him well when it comes to these press conferences. But, I mean, come on, he's essentially quoting from Proverbs, which is great. And I believe in Proverbs. I think it's a good thing, but it's sort of the same thing, right? I mean, he's basically saying, show me, right? You got to see it. It has to be action. You can't just sit there and cast a vision. And part of this is all now he's cast his vision at least as much as he can. And now the action has to come. So setting the foundation for the football team and bringing in all the recruits and bringing in all the transfers and pushing people out and, managing the roster and burning down Louisiana now that he's left. All those things are things that are things that he's going to now have to do. We'll see. I mean, I love it. There's a guy in the comments here who calls him Sling Blade Billy, and that's exactly what he'll be known as if he doesn't win, and if his recruiting classes suck. And if his recruiting classes are great, we'll be like, isn't it great how he's so thoughtful? So look, I love the pressers. It's fun to pull them apart piece by piece, but at the end of the day, it's a press conference. Like, I'm going to care who comes in on the recruiting trail. I'm going to care how they look on the field, how they're disciplined, whether they're throwing shoes all over the place and that sort of stuff. I'm not really going to worry too much about what he says to the press, unless Gator Dave asks him a question, at which point he better answer respectfully.
Yeah, Gator Dave. Get Gator Dave on it. That I want to see some of those questions there. Napier was asked about support staff and the role they play on the team. Talked about how, these college jobs, how they're burnout jobs, and he's trying to create, in that building the army. He's trying to let people focus on what's most important to winning on Saturdays. But in the recruiting process, how people look at a bunch of different things. You got families to deal with. And he referred to, I know Katie Turner keeps coming up, and there's been a few other people in that support staff department that have been getting a lot of shine in the media, but he called it the Ritz-Carlton effect on the hospitality they show. And I like that because there was a big weekend this past weekend, tons of recruits in the building. And it seems like all these people in the support staff, you see them pop up all over social media with the players. And the players seem to love them. The players seem to love all these people that Billy are bringing in here. And he says they're in the sales business, selling and presenting the product, creating a unique experience for the players and their families. And it's important in recruiting to get very individualized because no situation is the same. So, again, it's like you said, Will. I know it's January and we're looking for things that are exciting us right now about a new coach and a new program and everything else. And everybody in recruiting can say something similar to this type of thing. But we just came from a situation with the coaching staff where we're hearing recruits that are now committed to the program talk about, yeah, they just didn't call me that much. Like now he's talking about in this level of detail about how individualized of an approach they can take with this much of a staff. And I think that's the part that has Florida, Gator Nation excited and looking forward to the future here with Billy Napier.
Yeah, man. Again, I look at it. It's funny because he visited Arch Manning today, right? And that turns into a pretty big story. You certainly texted me, and I'm like,
which I had no idea we were in on Arch Manning. Had not heard Florida and Arch Manning together once before.
Well, so first off, visiting is not the same as being in on. I think those are two different things. But certainly, you would have said, if Mullen had been visiting somebody at IMG, we would have said, well, we're not going to get that guy. And Napier's already proven that he can go into IMG and get a guy who's then going to come to Florida over a matter of a couple of weeks. So, hey, maybe he makes that switch, right? But the reality is that Mullen went after Justin Fields pretty hard when he first came to Florida, and Fields decides to go to Georgia and obviously then leaves Georgia. But still, when I remember specifically Mullen going and recruiting Justin Fields, and everyone going, yeah, McElwain wouldn't have gone after Fields. And, the reality is that it was just as bad behind the scenes when it came to the recruiting under the Mullen regime as it was under the McElwain regime, maybe a little bit better, but not that much better. And so I'm waiting, right? I'm waiting to, just like you said, that what is vision without action is a dream. I'm waiting.
But think about it,
and I'm happy with everything I've seen thus far. What
are the schools that you hear tied closely to Arch Manning outside of the obvious with, he lives in Louisiana. So you hear LSU and you hear Ole Miss with the Manning family, but you hear Alabama, Texas, Georgia, those were all visits this past season, all in the Saban tree. Napier is very much in that family right there. So that's what makes me think that, I'm not even saying Arch Manning would be the best fit for the Gators right this second, but it's just interesting to not have seen him tied to Florida once this fall, for Napier to be out there at least having the conversation. Of course, Napier, based in Louisiana, probably familiar with the school at Newman down there in New Orleans too. So maybe he's cross paths with the kid.
It's funny because you say the same thing about Trevor Etienne. You can say the same thing about Shamar James, who actually was tied to Florida and then saw, to heck with it, they're not contacting me enough. You can say the same thing about Kamari Wilson and Devin Moore, right? These are guys who Florida should have been in on, but was not. And so you think about the Florida program, you think about Urban Meyer when he came in, having a big recruit in terms of both Percy Harvin, but then also Tim Tebow. And Arch Manning would be that kind of bang, right? You bring in a guy like Arch Manning as your quarterback in next year's class, and there's no doubt that you're a recruiter at that point. So look, I'm cautiously optimistic, but I don't want to pretend like the things that Napier is doing are anything all that special, considering the competition that he's going to have to go against. If we were the Big Ten, I'd say this is great. We're about to win we're about to win a Big Ten title and then get smacked in the playoffs. But this isn't the Big Ten. This is the SEC. And so, again, I go back to what he said. He's realistic, right? We got to worry about mowing our own lawn. Vision without action is a dream. That exists for him And that, I think, is the way we need to evaluate, right? Is that, when we start talking about what's real are the transfers coming in. What's real are the guys who've committed. What's real are the staff being in place. And those are the things we're going to talk about moving forward. Arch Manning ain't real yet. At some point he might be. And if he is, then we'll have a much different conversation, because at that point I'm seeing some action. And we're seeing some action in small ways, but, not Arch Manning level yet.
All right, let's that covers suppressor pretty well. Let's move on to 4Bits here. Talk about some of these transfers coming in that have committed over the past week here. Montrell Johnson Jr., the running back, listed at 5'11", 210 pounds. He led the Raging Cajuns in carries last season. Only started one game. He mostly was the backup. 162 carries, and he racked up 838 yards and 12 touchdowns. He was the Sun Belt Conference Freshman of the Year. So this is one of the Raging Cajuns coming our way. Will, good back here, good back, young back. Obviously, following the coach to Gainesville, it seems like kind of a no-brainer. They seem to have clicked well in his first year out in Lafayette.
Yeah, it's also a filling of a hole. So if you look at the classes in 2018, the Lorenzo Lingard was in that class. 19 was Naquan Wright. 20 was DeMarcus Bowman. 21 is Montrell Johnson, and 22 now is Trevor Etienne. So when you Etienne. So when you think about the filling out the class, having 5 running backs, but not having them all from the same recruiting class. Now, granted, those guys all have different classes, right? Etienne will be a freshman, Johnson's a sophomore, Bowman's a redshirt sophomore, Wright's a redshirt junior, and Lingard's a redshirt senior. And then you got COVID year weirdness that goes on that some of those guys might be able to take as well. But having a guy in each class, I think, is important, because now the running back room is balanced. So one guy goes pro, or you're not going to have 3 guys go pro all at the same time and have a room that's just empty. And that's the thing you really want to avoid. Now, maybe Montrell Johnson ends up being the guy who hits, right? And DeMarcus Bowman ends up being somebody who's sort of a receiver out of the backfield or something like that. We have no idea how these guys are going to be used. But at the end of the day now, you have a balance overall in your roster with those 5 running backs, to where you're never going to be left having to scramble in the transfer portal, hopefully again, which means that you can just focus on bringing in high school players in that position. So I think filling that hole in that 2021 class, because Greg Knox was not all that successful at bringing in running back recruits, I think that's actually what this transfer does. And Johnson's a very good player, don't get me wrong. But I think having that consistency and having that build up against the entire up across the roster is an important part, an important aspect of why you bring in a running back.
Another transfer here from Louisiana, the third and maybe final transfer. You don't think they're going to take too many more guys from Louisiana here? So Osiris Torrance comes in. This might be the most impactful player that ends up joining this roster for the 2022 seasons. Torrance comes to Gainesville as a 3-year starter with the Raging Cajuns. He had 38 starts under his belt, started 14 games in 2021, was named first team all Sun Belt. And at the conclusion of the season there, as a sophomore in 2020, he started all 11 games for the Raging Cajuns, who was second team all Sun Belt and a member of the offensive line that finished the year ranked 5th nationally and first in the Sun Belt in tackles for loss allowed. So a very good offensive line there in Louisiana. The line also opened up Louisiana's rushing attack, which ranked 21st in the nation with 213 yards per game, and was mentioned in the Joe Moore Award as a semifinalist for the best offensive line in the country for their outstanding play there. So Osiris Torrance seems like a big get for Billy Napier. Chooses Florida over LSU. Could have an immediate impact on the offensive line next year.
Yeah, this isn't a balance selection. This is a get better now selection. In fact, when you look at it from a balance perspective, that 2019 class had Riley Simons, Will Harrod, and Ethan White at guard, and even Kingsley Eggleton, if you wanted to put him at guard too, though he's obviously moved over to center. And Osiris Torrance comes in, and he's immediately going to start. So you look at it, the offensive line with Stuart Reese and Gene Lance leaving was going to be Garage at left tackle, White at left guard, Eggleton at center, Braun probably at right guard, and then Tarquin at right tackle. You have Torrance slotting in at right guard, which leaves Braun and Tarquin to duke it out for that right tackle spot. And tackle is really sort of Braun's natural position. He came in as a tackle. Or potentially Braun, who's been playing right guard, now can battle White for left guard. But more than anything, now it means you got 6 offensive linemen who have experience. And if you think about what happened coming into this past year, is Florida basically only had 5 guys plus Tarquin, if you really thought about who they trusted. Now, Braun, I think they were able to get some trust in throughout the year. But at the end of the day, when Reese went down, when DeLance went down, the running game went down with it because they just didn't have bodies. So Torrance, if nothing else, is another body, but he's an elite guy who, Alabama wanted and real Power 5 SEC programs wanted when he was transferring out of Louisiana. Obviously the connection to Napier makes sense to send him to Florida. And yeah, it's a big pickup, but again, guards are important, but tackles are critical, especially in the passing game. And that's really, I think, where some of the value is going to come from Torrance is if he can play not even all SEC level, if he can just play slightly below that and be a solid right guard in the SEC. But to be able to allow Braun and Tarquin and even Garage then to focus on tackle is an important part of them being able to solidify that position.
Another transfer here, Georgia cornerback Jalen Kimber, a red shirt freshman with 4 years of eligibility remaining, was initially projected to be a starter entering into fall camp, but he for Georgia. But he underwent season-ending shoulder surgery last September, and so he hasn't played since then. He appeared in 3 games in 2020, but he played behind 2 NFL starters, Eric Stokes and Tyson Campbell. The shoulder injury that kept Kimber off the field at Georgia this past season. He attempted to play without the surgery, appearing in the UAB game, but he expected he ended up not working out there, and he's expected to be fairly limited through spring drills. So he was in Gainesville this past weekend, and he was healthy enough to compete, and he might be healthy enough by fall camp to potentially compete for a starting position. But at the very worst, it seems like we've at least solidified the secondary with some more depth.
Yeah, I mean, so before Kemba, Florida only had 6 guys at corner. You had Jadon Hill, Jadarius Perkins, Avery Helm, Ethan Pouncey, Jason Marshall, and Jordan Young. And Young and Pouncey hadn't played very much, and Jadon Hill obviously coming off of an injury with Kyrie Elam leaving. And then, just really there's not a whole lot of depth there. There's a ton of depth at safety, not as much depth at corner. And so bringing in a guy at corner who can be opposite Jason Marshall, the reality is Patrick Toney wants to be able to play a bunch of man-to-man. He wants to be able to single up on the outside, which will allow him to bring unique blitzes. And he does some stuff where you basically fake blitzes. He calls it a creeper, but basically you do that sort of stuff and you need corners who are going to be able to lock things down. And Kimber is a guy who, you think about how elite that Georgia defense was last year, and Kimber was going to be a part of that. Maybe not necessarily a starter. He was battling for a starting job, but he was going to be a part of that. And then gets injured and doesn't play. But, he was basically at least on the 2 deep for that Georgia team in terms of being a starter there. And I think that's a valuable addition. Now, is that much better than Avery Helm or Jadon Hill or Jadarius Perkins? I have no idea. And so, I suspect that Billy Napier's watched a lot of film on Kimber back in high school to see what sort of skills he has. It's a shoulder injury. So shoulder injuries are not going to impact your speed or your change of direction or those sorts of things. And so if you think about what a corner needs to succeed, so long as he's healthy, I think Kimber will be an excellent addition to this roster.
Highly touted cornerback coming out of Texas in high school, was recruited by Corey Raymond at LSU, had a good relationship with Raymond, and that's likely what put him over the top for Florida coming down to Gainesville. Let's move on to 6 bits here. Jay Bateman joins the staff as the inside linebackers coach. He'll coach the inside. Mike Pete will coach the outside. Bateman and North Carolina parted ways after 2021. The Tar Heels yielded an average of 418 yards and 32 points, ranking near the bottom of the ACC. He was the defensive coordinator there for North Carolina, and disappointing stretch for him at North Carolina because he had a very successful run before his time in Chapel Hill as the defensive coordinator at Army from 2014 to 2018. And he really was. I remember when Mac Brown hired him, it was really applauded across most college football. He's a Broyles Award finalist for 2 different seasons in 2016 and 2018 at Army, and he led one of the most suffocating defenses in the nation. Army was number 9 in total defense in 2018, number 33 in 2017, number 3 in 2016. The thing I like about Bateman here coming in, well, I know the time at North Carolina didn't go totally as planned, but this North Carolina staff with Mac Brown, they are recruiting at heights that North Carolina has never really seen before, and Bateman was a part of that. He's credited as the main recruiter with 5-star defensive lineman Keyshawn Silver that ended up committing to the Tar Heels, Will. And I mean, you go back a few years ago, we weren't talking about a lot of 5-star players, even from the state of North Carolina, heading to UNC Chapel Hill.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you look at the Tar Heels. He took over, and they went from 54th to 75th to 101st in yards per play allowed. So not all that great. They gave up 35 points to that just awful Florida State offense that we saw at the end of the year. So from the standpoint of if he was going to be the defensive coordinator at Florida, I think we'd all have some questions, and we'd be like, why did we just go get a little bit younger Todd Grantham? But I don't think that's the case with Bateman, right? You're not really hiring him. I mean, you're obviously hiring him to deal with the linebackers, but the other thing that you're really hiring for is recruiting, which is what you mentioned. And I think the other thing that you're sort of hiring him for in some capacity is some stability. So that always was my worry with some of the guys who were rumored for this, is it was going to be a really young staff, a lot of guys in their early to mid 30s. And those are guys who are looking to move up the rung, which is great. You want people coming and poaching your staff. At the same time, a guy who's 48 years old, he's a failed Power 5 defensive coordinator at this point. It's going to take some time to build his resume back up. And then there are also some family medical issues that Shands is really sort of a great place for him to be in Gainesville. And so you combine those things and you really figure that this is probably somebody who wants to be at Florida for an extended period of time. And so if Patrick Toney gets picked off in a year or two, right, it's somebody who will be able to slide right in, will understand Napier's processes, and in the meantime is going to be able to recruit at a high level, which obviously is the most important part. The good news is, and this is something that I think we've learned from the McElwain and the Muschamp eras, is that if the guy recruits, you can always replace him afterwards, right? We learned this from Ron Zook. I mean, Ron Zook brought in great players, didn't really do a whole lot with them on the field. You bring in a better coach, and all of a sudden teams win a national championship. So if you had to ask me, do I care more about recruiting or do I care more about on-field development for the guys who are being brought in? I'd absolutely tell you I care more about recruiting. And like you said, Bateman's got a real good track record, especially there at North Carolina at defensive coordinator.
Yeah, and I will fully admit I don't have my thumb on the pulse of the program at North Carolina like we pay as close attention to as we do with Florida, but it just seemed like from the outside this year, North Carolina was disappointing across the board. It's not like their offense totally lit it up, but it just seems like disappointing team across the board. Maybe some younger players getting playing time early didn't quite click for him there. But I think that's an excellent addition. As like you said, it's just the inside linebackers coach. Excellent addition. Maybe he's only here for a year or two, but I definitely makes the staff stronger in my opinion. Sean Spencer comes in too. He joins the staff as the co-defensive coordinator and defensive line coach. Spent 6 years at Penn State under James Franklin. But he was with Franklin before the Penn State job down at Vanderbilt as well. He also this most recently last 2 seasons was with the New York Giants, so that's our second New York Giants assistant hired along with Rob Sale. But he was with the Nittany Lions from 2014 to 2018, and while he was there, he coached Penn State to 5 straight seasons with at least 40 sacks from 2015 to 2019. Penn State also led the country in sacks per game in both 2015 and 2018. He's coached at least 10 NFL draft picks as a college coach, including 2 at Vanderbilt. Don't hear that a whole lot at Vanderbilt. And while at Penn State, he a lot of high-end picks. You've seen it in recent years at Owa to Baltimore, a lot of different guys. But the real crown, the real jewel in his crown there is Micah Parsons. He was the head recruiter for Micah Parsons. Probably going to be the NFL Rookie of the Year for the Dallas Cowboys at Penn State there. So Sean Spencer, elite recruiter, develops well. You're going to have a solid pass rush there for the Florida Gators coming back here in the next couple of years, Will.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a co-defensive coordinator with Tony, so the question is going to be who's going to be calling the plays, and both guys are going to be scheming with who's calling the plays. I don't know what the fascination is with the New York Giants because they were terrible. I mean, I live in the
Joe Judge
Northeast.
got that Alabama connection. Joe
I
Judge is a Saban guy.
I guess, man, I live in the Northeast. I watch the Eagles. I'm not an Eagles fan, but they're on all the time. When they play the Giants, even the Eagles look good. So, I'm sitting here going, I hope Billy knows what he's doing because at the end of the day, Sale and Spencer, in their time in New York, I don't necessarily did anything to truly differentiate themselves. Of course, that's also why they're probably heading back to the college game, right? Is that having the best players really helps. And so having a guy like Micah Parsons there on defense helps your defenses be chaotic. I mean, that's his nickname, right? Coach Chaos. And so, having Micah Parsons on your defense makes your defense really good. And then when you get to the NFL and you don't have Micah Parsons on your roster and you have to deal with whatever flotsam Gettleman gives you there in New York, well, now all of a sudden it becomes a problem. So, look, I don't know. I think the interesting thing is that he saw James Franklin help build a program there at Vanderbilt, and anybody who participates in building Vanderbilt into a team that doesn't lose 10 games a year has to have learned something in terms of how to coach and how to get the most out of his players. But he also stuck with Franklin for an extended period of time, so it's not like he's moved around. It's not like he's really moved up. He's 51 years old now. Again, I sort of say what I said about Bateman. You wouldn't expect him to be a guy who's just going to be looking for that next job to jump up. Somebody who can sort of maybe help Patrick Toney, who's only 32. You sort of take the seasoning of Spencer, and then you take the aggressiveness of Toney, and hopefully you can sort of get the best of both worlds there. But I don't know. If you'd have told me at the beginning of all this that we were going to go raid Louisiana and the New York Giants, I might have said, interesting. So we'll get to that when we talk about the overall staff. But look, again, I don't know, right? This is the thing that I think we talk through all these names, we talk through all these staff guys, and we know kind of what they did. But Mac Brown's a really good recruiter. So when you start talking about Jay Bateman, it's like, was the recruiting him or was it Mac Brown? And Sean Spencer, James Franklin's a pretty good recruiter. So was it James Franklin or was it Sean Spencer? And I think the same thing is going to be true when we look at this staff is it Patrick Toney or is it Billy Napier? And that's the question everybody's going to be asking. And that's one of the reasons why you end up with a Jim McElwain coming to Florida and struggling, because you ask the question, were the offensive players coming to Alabama because of Nick Saban or because of Jim McElwain? I think we all know the answer to that question, right? Because we've seen Saban run through a whole bunch of different assistants. I still think the guy at the top matters the most, but the assistants who can execute his plan become important. So that to me is the question, and maybe is the Joe Judge connection and why that makes some sense, because those are people who understand the Alabama process. And if Napier's trying to put his own spin on the Alabama process, then these guys understanding that will understand their role and will be able to support him to bring in those elite prospects.
I don't know if you follow the news out of Jacksonville, Florida much this year, but I can assure you that having success in Gainesville has nothing to do with having success in the NFL. And I'll just
I know what you're talking about. They got the first. The Jaguars got the first pick in the draft. I feel like that's a successful
we won
season.
that again. That's a win. We got to. It's not golf, man. It ain't golf. We got to figure that out. Jacksonville's a great golfing community, but the lowest draft pick does not mean you had a good year. Will, let's move on to that dollar. We'll talk about the rest. Here we are. We got a full picture of the Florida Gators coaching staff for 2022. Of course, at the head coaching role. Also, quickly, before we dive into this, you mentioned Jim McElwain a few times here. If you haven't had the opportunity to watch that Barstool segment, it was filmed for the Barstool Arizona Bowl. But if you haven't had the opportunity to watch that segment where he's interviewed about the shark and they introduce him to the guy who's in the picture of the shark, take 6 minutes of your life and go watch that, because it was hysterical, I thought. So do yourself a favor and go watch that. But Will, let's move on to a dollar here. We'll talk about the Florida Gators coaching staff here. Head coach, of course, Billy Napier. We've talked a lot about Billy Napier. We'll move on. We talked a little bit about Rob Sale as an offensive coordinator and offensive line coach last week. Another offensive line coach, Darnell Stapleton, pro experience along that offensive line up front. That's been a problem over the years with recruiting in the last couple coaching cycles here, and development. And I think with this double duty here with Sale and Stapleton, I'm loving the combination. I'm loving the NFL experience. And I think that's going to bring a little extra juice to the position that we've been lacking.
Yeah, well, I mean, you figure you've now got Cameron Waits and you've got Osiris Torrance coming in who know the Louisiana way. And then you've got some pretty talented guys on the offensive line. I wouldn't say there's anybody that I just go, oh, yeah, that's Alex Leatherwood or anything like that, or Evan Neal. But you've got some decent talent there. And if you can get the reality is that there was there's potential there, but 9 false starts killed them. Right. Or there's potential there, but the one missed block killed them. And that sort of happened over and over and over again. And if they can get consistent up front, I think that'll really make a difference. So yeah, having the 2 offensive line coaches is an advantage. That's an advantage that Billy Napier has specifically called out. Now it does mean that he's going to have to be more committed and more prepared when it comes to play calling. And so that's where the army of assistants comes in, right? Is he can't be wasting time figuring out what one of his recruits' phone numbers is. Like they got to be handing him the phone to talk to that recruit, and it takes him 2 minutes instead of 5. And you got to find every edge everywhere you got it. And that's one of the edges he's sort of counting on, is having those 2 offensive line coaches. So I like the 2 offensive line coaches. I think Stapleton's very good. Again, my New York Giants hesitancy still comes in with Sale a little bit, but I think both young guys.
He's a double duty for you because he's also Louisiana, Will. He's got a little bit of that Raging Cajun for you too. Your favorite combo, the Raging Cajun New York Giant.
We're gonna have to schedule a home and home with those guys because they are not real happy right now. Which it's the nature of college football, I suppose.
I would love to do a home and home with them, just to spite UCF. That'd be or Central Florida, as you like to call them now, exclusively. All right, running backs, Jabbar Jaluk or Jaluke. I'm still working on the pronunciation there. I'm sorry. Jaluk. All right. So far, early returns, Will, bringing over the running back from Louisiana. That's a solid get right there. Hey, look, this is a room that you're gonna have to have some guys step up this year. We've seen a lot of hope in that room with Lingard, with Bowman. We've seen some guys. We got Wright coming back. And with Davis is now gone, and Pierce is now gone. You're gonna have some new guys step up this year in 2022. Will,
I got nothing but good things to say about Jaluk. I mean, you got Trevor Etienne, who commits. So you end up with a blue chip top 150 or I guess 180 guy.
Right, Etienne too. Sorry, I didn't mention
coming in, and then you got Montrell Johnson coming over from Louisiana. So he took a room that with Damian Pierce and Malik Davis leaving was getting kind of bare. Right, you had Lingard, who's got a year left. You've got DeMarcus Bowman, who's eligible to go pro after this year, and you got Naquan Wright, who had an injury there at the end of the year, and we're going to see how I don't really know how serious that is and what that means in terms of his availability in the spring. And now you've got Etienne and Johnson there to fill out that room. So I mean, you could say what you will about any of these coaches, but at the end of the day, if you said who's filled out the room best, I think you'd look at Jabbar Jaluk and say, he's got his players now. Now we'll have to see what he can do with them, but he's got his players, and that's part of the battle.
Kiri Colbert at wide receiver, of course. I mean, this is where you start to, I'm 35 years old. I start to sit there and feel old a little bit because I remember watching Kiri Colbert very well at USC, solid wide receiver, a solid pro career too, but coached at USC the last 3 years. Of course, it was on an underachieving staff with Clay Helton, but couple bright spots for Colbert, helped develop Michael Pittman, who's a great receiver for the Colts, and Tyler Vaughns as well was an excellent receiver for USC. USC also last couple of years they've had strong receivers in that system with Graham Harrell too out there. So that was actually, though the program as a whole was underachieving, that passing game was and the receivers actually were pretty decent with Kiri Colbert. And again, this is a young coach. He's got to prove himself. He's got more West Coast connections right now. So it's an interesting move bringing him out east. But I think it's an interesting move, and we'll see. I'm more of a we'll see on this one than anything else.
Yeah, he's got his work cut out for him. You look at the Florida roster, and they only got 7 scholarship players at wide receiver right now. And in 2019, 2020, and 2021, they've had 10 scholarship wide receivers. So they're down 3 when you think about numbers, and they don't have anybody in the 2022 class yet. And they haven't brought in anybody to sort of fill those gaps. Keeping Justin Shorter in house was a big deal, right? Being able to have somebody who's got that sort of experience, who's averaged something like 30 catches over the last couple of years is a big deal for that wide receiver room. But here's the reality. I mean, Trent Whittemore has been decent, but hasn't been able to stay healthy. Jamarcus Weston has had relatively little impact. Jaquavian Frazier, same thing. Xavier Henderson has been out there starting, but has not morphed into a star. And then you got Marcus Burke and Dejon Reynolds, who barely played last year. So there's a lot of development that needs to go on with the 7 guys who are here. But I also suspect you start thinking about who else might they go get in the transfer portal, what's important to fill out those spots in the overall roster, both with high school recruiting and with the transfer portal. And Colbert's going to be key in terms of just bringing in prospects, because right now there aren't enough guys on the roster, and that's a place where Florida is going to need to focus.
I know I've saw Javon Baker, Bama wide receiver, looking at Florida closely. He's in the transfer portal right now. Any updates on Baker from what you heard over the weekend?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like he enjoyed the official visit. Everybody enjoyed the official visits, and getting Baker on campus is a big deal, right? I mean, again, just from a numbers perspective, I mean, right now with only 7 guys, you think about it. A couple of years ago, I remember when Trask in 2020 was having his big year, and you'd have 4 wide, and then the next time Florida went out there, they'd have a different 4 wide out there. Right now, they can't do that. They don't have enough players to do it. So, that's a big deal. And you think about all the guys they've sent to the NFL between Trevon Grimes and Van Jefferson, and then you got Tyree Cleveland and Kadarius Toney. The list goes on and on and on with these guys that Mullen was able to send to the NFL, and Billy Gonzalez was able to send to the NFL, but they didn't backfill it. And so, you think about when Mullen took over, one of the first things he did was go get Trevon Grimes and Van Jefferson through the transfer portal. He was one of the first people to really start using the transfer portal. And that's really, I think, what Colbert's going to have to do, along with Billy Napier, is they're going to have to bulk up those numbers somewhat. And so, yeah, I mean, Javon Baker is a big part of that, because 1, he's talented, but 2, just having numbers and starting to fill out that room is an important part of the process moving forward.
Hey, you look at I know everyone's going to hope that their guy turns into Jameson Williams, but Jameson Williams was an afterthought in Ohio State receiver room last year. Of course, that receiver room is completely loaded. It ended up not being overrated or anything. It was completely loaded, but goes down to Alabama and breaks out as the number 1 receiver on that offense last year. So we'll have hope across the board to find our Jameson Williams. That's what everyone's looking for in the portal this year. Tight ends coach William Piegler comes down from Michigan State on Mel Tucker's staff. Of course, Michigan State was one of the breakout teams of the 2021 season. He was a running backs coach, though, up in East Lansing. Kenneth Walker III was very much in that Heisman race until early November. Great season there. The running backs are a big part of that offense up there at Michigan State, and he will take assume the tight ends role in this offense. Well,
I mean, Piegler's good. Seems like a good coach. Limited track record, only 36 years old.
Young guy, yeah.
Young guy. He's not somebody that I look at and go, "Ooh, home run hire." But he's also not somebody that I look at and go, "Oh, that's a terrible hire." He's somebody who I think fits the mold of what Billy Napier's looking for in a tight end coach, which is that, this is one of those guys who you imagine, if Florida's tight end succeed, is going to get an opportunity to move up to, an offensive coordinator position at some point, whether that's at Florida, where Sale goes someplace else and that opens up the spot for Piegler to move in, or whether that's someplace else. But you would imagine that Piegler's one of those guys who is sort of an up and comer, but certainly has shown the energy out of the recruiting trail early on that you'd like to see.
All right, over to the defensive side of the ball, you have 2 defensive coordinators, co-defensive coordinator / safeties, Patrick Toney, and co-defensive coordinator / defensive line, Sean Spencer. Since we just talked about Spencer, early returns on Toney, what do you think?
I mean, everything that I've read about him is great. I've gone and listened and found some of the stuff that talks about his philosophy. I'm sure we'll be talking about that during the offseason. I really like his defensive philosophy and the way he tries to design his defense to confuse the quarterback. Again, 31s, there's not a huge track record. The Louisiana defense was good, but at least in 2020, the Louisiana defense only played other Sun Belt teams. And then in 2021, win the Sun Belt, and the defense was a big part of that. But again, this is one of those things where he's sort of tied to the hip with Napier. And, we will know when we take closer inspection how much of this is Napier and how much of it is Tony. The good news is you look at like a team like Baylor. So Baylor's defensive coordinator, I can't remember his name right now, but Baylor's defensive coordinator was Tony's mentor. And Baylor's defense with Dave Aranda has been very, very good and really has improved over the last couple of years. And now Tony's taking those concepts and sort of moving that into what he's going to be doing. So the good news is Napier's an offensive guy. Tony's a defensive guy. And the fact that the defense didn't drop off at Louisiana when Tony took over there, I think is a really good sign. I think the fact that he's out there and that Napier's calling him a star, and a star, a rising star, makes a big difference. At the same time, Napier has reason to believe, or reason to pump up the guys he's bringing from Louisiana as stars that he's trying to do. But again, there are guys at Louisiana that Napier didn't bring with him. So the fact that he decided to bring Tony with him and put him at defensive coordinator says something about what he thinks about him. And I think fans are going to enjoy his philosophy. It's going to be a very, very stark departure from what we just saw under Todd Grantham.
We have all offseason to get into that too. Phil Snow, defensive coordinator from Baylor. I couldn't come up with that off the top of my head because I always just think about Dave Aranda being the defensive mind out there, but Phil Snow will. Cornerbacks coach, Corey Raymond. This was probably, if you had to rank the hires, this would probably get the highest grades from the fan base for sure. Did great work out at LSU, developed all kinds of talent. LSU is one of those schools that puts themselves in the mix as DBU. We've already seen the payoff with Corey Raymond with some of the commits. Certainly, you got to believe that he had a huge part to play, a huge role to play in the Kamari Wilson commit. You've seen Devin Moore, the transfer with Kimber here. I mean, you're already seeing the immediate payoff. This guy's a superstar assistant in college football, and it feels like Napier in Florida is very lucky to have him.
Yeah, I mean, you think about what LSU's defense has been able to do it with, Greedy Williams and Grant Delpit and some of those guys they've had at safety who've just been elite players. And you go, okay, you can build a defense. If you're strong up front, you can build a defense in a secondary from the safety down. And that seems to be what they're doing. They're really going heavy after safeties, which is funny because Florida has gone heavy after safeties the last 2 years. So, the 2021 class had Dakota Mitchell, Corey Collier, and Donovan McMillan. And then the 2020 class had 5. So Finley Graham, Kamar Wilcoxon, Rashad Torrance, Trevez Johnson, and Mordecai McDaniel. Now, Torrance, Johnson, and McDaniel have gotten quite a bit of playing time, but, you got 8 safeties the last 2 years, and now they bring in Kamari Wilson, Devin Moore, Miguel Mitchell, who just committed. And then they're still going after Jacoby Matthews, who's a safety as well. So I think that one of the things that they're trying to exploit is that there are real advantages to having guys who that safety is the most important position when it comes to the secondary these days. And there are reasons for that. And I think Florida's seen it over the last few years with, Donovan Steiner and Sean Davis and sort of the rotating cast of characters that we've had back in that safety position where just the defense couldn't get stops. And one of the reasons they couldn't get stops is because they didn't have reliable safety play. And even if you think back to those Urban Meyer teams where you had Reggie Nelson running around back there, just causing all sorts of havoc, and having those safeties is critical. And so, yeah, I mean, I think Corey Raymond's the star. I mean, when you look at this staff, there are 2 guys that I look at and go, those were home runs. One's Corey Raymond. The next is the guy we're going to get to next, Mike Peterson. Those are the 2 that I go, those are the stars. And if Tony, Raymond, and Peterson turn out to be stars and these other guys can recruit decently, and Napier turns out to be an excellent recruiter, then Florida's in great hands. If Raymond, Peterson, and Tony struggle, then I think the overall team, at least on the field, is going to struggle a little bit, and then it'll be an analysis of where they are from a player procurement standpoint.
Yeah, moving on to the linebackers here, you mentioned outside linebackers coach will be Mike Peterson, inside linebackers will be Jay Bateman, and I look at this the same as I look at some of the other positions here. Will the high end potential of both of these guys, where they can potentially operate. I know Mike Peterson is earlier in his career than Jay Bateman, but if these guys can operate at the upper echelon of their potential, I mean, this looks like it's going to be a very solid defensive side of the ball for the Florida Gators going forward.
Yeah, Peterson isn't that much younger. He's 45. Bateman's 48. I think the big deal.
He hasn't been coaching as long.
Sure. Well, because he spent so much time in the NFL.
I know. So he's a young coach. He's only been coaching for a few years. Yeah.
There you go. So I think the big thing is that when he was at Florida originally, and then Muschamp goes to South Carolina, Peterson goes with him, and then when Muschamp leaves that job, Peterson stays. And so the fact that people have seen him as that kind of guy who can be a holdover from one staff to the next, I think is a real feather in his cap. And then you've also got him as the alumni liaison, right? So it shouldn't be lost on people that this past weekend you had guys like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson or CD Deuce, whatever he's called now, coming back to campus, right? A guy who has had his differences when it comes to the Dan Mullen regime. And, he's back on campus helping recruit to Florida. And I think that makes a difference. And Peterson is a big part of that, right? Embracing the history of the university is important. And while Napier has gone out and really sort of cleaned house and brought in his own staff, Peterson is a guy who has that Florida pedigree and goes all the way back to those teams that were winning SEC titles under Spurrier. And I think having that connection is important. And especially with the departure of Keyone Ratliff, I think having a guy like Peterson there gives some credibility to people who've been following this program for 30 years now.
Good mix on the staff of experience and some up and coming coaches. I like what Napier's put together in year one. And again, after the last couple of years of just exhausting calls for different coaching changes, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun to watch this coaching staff go to work, and we're already seeing the early returns on the recruiting trail. That's all for tonight's show. Will, you got any final words before we head out?
I just say, look, when it comes to the staff, there's no Todd Grantham. Like I look at it and, it was clear when Grantham came in based on his track record that we were in trouble. And, anybody who was looking at the numbers prior to him coming in knew it. Anybody who knew his nickname, Third Grantham, knew that we weren't getting, it wasn't that he was going to be terrible. I didn't think he was going to be as bad as he was, but I didn't think he was going to be a difference maker. And the thing is, when you start looking at these guys, I think when you look at Corey Raymond, when you look at Patrick Toney, when you look at Mike Peterson, even when you look at William Piegler, right? And Kerry Colbert, these are guys who may flame out, but they may be difference makers. So it's exciting to me that Napier has taken some big swings here, and that especially with Raymond, that pretty much he's already hit a home run. But you look at these other guys, if he can hit another home run with some of these guys, then you're going to have a staff that really is elite. But even so, if he just has a staff that's kind of in tune with what he wants to do, I think that'll be a real upgrade, because one of the things that we really heard, I know Neil Blackman for Saturday Night South called the Mullen sort of regime with Grantham and Hevesy really a toxic environment, had some staff members say that to him. And just having everybody sort of working in the same direction will be a big deal, even if not every one of these guys works out long-term.
Yeah, fresh start, big deal. I mean, you see the players going crazy over Napier apparently hooked them up with the parking and got a new living quarters situation going on down there. So sounds like a lot of things heading in the right direction. Early returns look good on the Billy Napier era. We'll be here every single week talking about it on Stand Up and Holler. Thank you again for joining this week. Please subscribe to the Read and Reaction channel on YouTube and check out any articles we post on readandreaction.com. For Will Miles, I'm Nick Knudsen. Go Gators. Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week. And check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. And as always, go Gators.